thank you to the choir on this fourth Sunday Advent. This child is. Who is this child? How do you teach someone what it means to love? How do you teach someone what it means to be vulnerable and to embrace one another, to care for one another? You give them a baby. So this Sunday, I want to share with you two separate stories that take place thousands of years apart, and yet they are intimately related. These are two stories that deal with angels, with middle-of-the-night encounters, with unanswered prayers, and with answered prayers. Now, the first story takes place in 1992, and it's a story that is Auburn's story. And she's written this story down in Auburn's words. I want to share with you what she says. She writes this, true story. I'm curled up in a fetal position on a filthy carpet in a cluttered apartment. I'm in horrible withdrawal from a drug that I've been addicted to for several years now. In my hand, I have a little piece of paper. It's dilapidated because I've been folding it and unfolding it to the point that it's almost falling apart. But you can make out the phone number on it. Right behind me, she writes, sleeping in the bedroom is my baby boy. She says, now I wasn't going to get a Mother of the Year award. In fact, at the age of 29, I was failing at a lot of things. I started out fairly auspiciously. I was that girl who had the opera lessons, spoke fluent French, and had college paid for. But I came to the conclusion that the thing I needed to do with all of that comfort was to destroy it. So curled up on my apartment floor, she says, I decided to get clean. I was leading the life that was going to lead me losing the most precious thing I'd ever had in my life, which was that baby boy. I was so desperate at that moment, she says, that I became willing to punch numbers into the phone. For those who were not around in 1992, you had to pick up the phone and push the numbers. The phone number was something my mother had sent me. I hadn't been speaking to my parents or anybody else for 3, 4, or 5 years, but she managed to get this number to me by mail. And in the letter she said, this is a Christian counselor, and since you can't talk to anybody else, maybe sometime you can call this person. So I dialed the numbers, and I heard a man say, hello. And I said, hi, I got this number from my mother. Do you think that maybe we could talk? I heard him shuffling around in bed. You could tell he was pulling some sheets up and sitting up. I heard a little radio in the background, and he turned it off, and he became very present, and he said, yes, what's going on? Auburn says, I hadn't told anybody, including myself, the truth for a long time. I told him I wasn't feeling so good, that I was scared, that things had gotten pretty bad in my marriage. I started telling him all sorts of truths, and this man didn't judge me. He just sat with me, and he listened with such kindness and gentleness. He would say, tell me more, or, oh, that must really hurt, or, oh. I made that call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he stayed up with me the whole night, just talking, just listening, just being with me until the sun rose, and by then I was feeling calm. I was feeling okay. The raw panic had passed. And so I asked at the end of the phone call, do you want to say a prayer with me? How long have you been a Christian counselor? And then there's this long pause. I hear him shifting, she writes. And he says, Auburn, please don't hang up. I've been trying not to bring this up. What? I ask. Do you promise you won't hang up? Yes. Well, I'm so afraid to tell you this, but the number you called, well, you got the wrong number. She says, I didn't hang up on him, but I never got his name, and I never called him back. But then she says, the next day I felt this kind of joy, like I was shining. I had gotten to see that there was this completely random love in the universe, that it could be unconditional, that some of it was for me. I can't tell you that I got my life together that day, but it became possible. and it became possible to be a teetotaling, semi-sane single parent and raising up that precious boy who's now a young scholar and athlete who graduated in 2013 from Princeton with honors. This is what I know, she says. In the deepest, blackest night of despair, if you can get just one pinhole of light, all of the grace rushes in. So now, story number 2. It's the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth. They are the parents of the one who would announce the coming of Jesus. Now, Zechariah and Elizabeth were of priestly lineage, but even with their holy lineage, their prayers went unanswered. And twice a year as a priest, Zechariah would make his way from the hills where he and Elizabeth lived to the city of Jerusalem. He would go and work in the temple for a week at a time. And on this particular day, which we'll read from our scripture in just a moment, Luke describes Zechariah being chosen by Lot to enter the inner sanctuary of the temple. So this is a big deal. A priest could spend their entire life going to the temple twice a year, 1 week at a time, and never being chosen to go inside the inner temple room. Once you were in this inner sanctuary, that was where supposedly you were able to meet God's presence and God's Spirit. You could serve for your entire life and never have this chance. But Zechariah is inside the temple while other people are gathered outside of the temple praying for him. And he lights the incense and he watches as the smoke curls up in the darkness. And he begins to pray. And in the middle of the night, the angel Gabriel appears. Now, Gabriel tells Zechariah not to be afraid, that his prayers have been answered. Zechariah cannot believe this gift of goodness. The angel can't believe that Zechariah is arguing with him. So the angel says, fine, if you don't want to believe me, that's your choice, but it's going to happen, and you're not going to be able to talk until this baby arrives. So Zechariah walks back out to the temple where he's expected to say a word of what he has encountered, but of course he is silenced. Now here's where the two stories tie together. To me, the story of Zechariah makes him one of the most relatable characters of the Christmas story. We know what it is like to long for something, right? You know what it's like to long for something. We know what it's like to feel like we have to give up hope or to endure with whatever situation we are in. We know what it's like to live with unanswered prayers. But the story of Zechariah tells us this. How can you expect the unexpected if you don't expect it? At some point, Zechariah and Elizabeth had given up hope. At some point, Auburn had given up hope. But at that breaking point, in the moment of darkness, an angel arrived, and life was never the same again. So think about during this season of Advent, what are you expecting to happen? If you want to see miracles take place, as we talked about in our Sunday school this morning, you have to look for them. Otherwise, you miss them completely. And in today's story, there are two angels, right? Number one, there is the angel that shows up. Maybe that's you this morning to be part of the Christmas miracle. Maybe someone this week will call you or reach out to you or stop you or talk to you in the grocery line or wherever it else may be. And for you, all a simple prayer is all you need. God, let me be your servant and listen. And then maybe you're like Gabriel, or maybe you're like Auburn. Maybe you need an angel in your life. Again, just a simple prayer. God, help me be open to new experiences and to new people. And my guess is that when you say this prayer, when you look for the unexpected, when you look for that beacon of hope and light and unexpected miracles, they will take place. Things will not always be the same. There is hope. So with all of that being said, I want to now, towards the end of this sermon, read for you the scripture that comes today from the Gospel of Luke on this fourth Sunday of Advent. Luke says, in the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was a descendant of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God. So see, Luke is setting up the entire story for you. They do everything perfect. They come from this priestly line. They're righteous. They live blamelessly according to all the commandments and the regulations of the Lord. But then Luke says they had no children because Elizabeth was barren and both were getting on in years. Once he was serving as a priest before God and his section was on duty, he was chosen by lot. So it's like drawing straws in the old world. He entered the sanctuary of the Lord and offered incense. At the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of people was praying outside, and there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing at the right hand of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, for good reason probably, because in the Old Testament when angels appeared, sometimes you were struck down by fire. Fear overwhelmed him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. The angel says to you today, do not be afraid, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John." Now, of course, the story continues on later, and John becomes John the Baptist. But this morning, the story continues with you. You may be an angel, or you may be in need of an angel. But know that within the deepest and darkest night, which was actually last night and tonight, the winter solstice, all it takes is just one pinhole of light, just a tiny little beam, and all of the grace can come rushing in. Thanks to God for the Christmas story, and we say it together. Amen.